huge welcome. Rupert's going to speak for about half an hour, and then we'll have questions for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have tea and coffee. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much. Thanks for the kind intro. Thanks everybody for turning up. It is great to see a packed room to hear this talk about political strategy, to hear this talk about the direction of the Green Party and the direction of British politics. So the title I've given this talk is, What is Green Populism? And you may well be asking, yes, what is green populism? So I'm going to explain. So the background is that, as you've heard, I now run a thing called the Climate Majority Project. What we try to do is to get most people involved in climate action. It's just a small, easy objective that we think will be achieved very, very soon. And if it is achieved, then we may actually, well, survive. So, you know, it's quite important. And in the Climate Majority Project, we do a bunch of things, and I'm happy to talk about those if you wish. But the one which is most super relevant is that one of the things we try to do is offer what is called thought leadership, intellectual leadership into the space of thinking around everything climate and green and related political stuff. And partly because of that, we've been fortunate to be joined this year in terms of our staff by none other than Caroline Lucas, whose name will be, I think, familiar to all of you, former Green MP, now no longer in Parliament. So, you know, she's been looking for what exactly she wants to do next. And one of the things she's doing is advising us, and she's part of our staff team now. And last year, when she was first sort of getting involved, she and I started thinking, along with a few others, including Jonathan Porritt, about these fundamental questions of the direction of British politics and where Greens ought to be going. And we came up with this idea, and we called the idea green popularism. And I'm going to explain, obviously, what that is. But, you know, to give you a kind of initial hint, the basic idea is Greens need to become really popular. And in order to become really popular, we need to have more successful, easily understandable appeals to issues which speak to people where they are coming from in terms of what matters to them. So far, perhaps so obvious, but the consequences are quite interesting. So we started putting together these ideas of trying to picture and explain what green popularism would be. And we talked it through with Adrian Ramsey, and he's very interested. We then did a video call with a bunch of senior people in the Green Party, including Peter Tatchell, Khan Ross, the international diplomat who is now in the party, Chris Williams, our brilliant election strategist in the Green Party, and Zach Polanski. They were all among those on that call who were very enthusiastic about the idea. So we thought, well, maybe we're onto something here. We sought to develop it further. So now in 2025, with Caroline as part of the Climate Majority Project, she and I are working on a report. The title of the report is going to have the idea of climate popularism in it. I'll get to this sort of differences of nuance between climate populism and green popularism a bit later. So Caroline and I are working on this report on what we call climate populism. And we're trying to make this idea of climate populism, the same kind of fundamental idea. How do we make climate great again? How do we have an appeal around climate which actually is intuitive and makes sense to loads of people? What we're going to try to do with this report is make that make sense to loads of people, including people who are thinking maybe of voting for all sorts of parties. Labour, Lib Dems, your party, even the Conservatives. Probably not Reform. We'll come to that. And obviously there's the party which should be banging most heavily on the door of this idea is the Green Party. So that's why when Ulverston Green Party invited me to give a talk, I said, yeah, why don't I give a talk on green popularism? And yeah, I can explain more what it's all about. So why is this necessary? Why do we have to engage in this kind of thinking? So I'm just going to offer you a couple of quick reminders of the context. They should be very obvious to you, again, really. So the Green Party did extraordinary things at the general election last year. the Green Party said, right, we're going to target 4 seats. We're going to try to win in 4 seats. We've got 1 at the moment. We're going to try to up that to 4, quadrupling the numbers. Everybody said, you can't do it. You're not going to do it. And, well, we did it. They did it. We now have 4 Green MPs. Extraordinary achievement. Most people said, oh, maybe you'll go to 2, but 4, nah, come off it. So, huge advance for the Green Party. At the same time, Reform UK got 5 MPs elected, just 1 more. Another remarkable achievement by them. Over the last year, however, you'll have perhaps noticed that in the opinion polls, unfortunately, the Green Party percentages haven't been going up a huge amount. The Reform percentages have been going up a lot. That is the fundamental context for where we are at. What is called populism is on the warpath. It is on the march. It has won the election in the United States. It is moving into powerful potential positions in a number of other countries, including France and Germany. And according to the opinion polls, the person most likely to be our next Prime Minister after Keir Starmer is, well, his name rhymes with garage. Don't make it sound kind of Ponzi and French, by the way. I think that gives him a sort of mystique, which is wholly inappropriate for a person who's made his reputation by pulling us out stupidly of the European Union. He's not Nigel Farage, he's Nigel Farage. Right? Just a little point to take away. Practice that yourselves. It's worth doing, yeah. So anyway, I've given the game away. Yes, I'm talking about Nigel Farage. And I'm going to keep using that pronunciation, and so should you. So this is serious. You know, these people, and they are really, really worrying people for all sorts of reasons, not least because they're basically climate deniers or climate delayers of a most extreme and ridiculous sort. These people are threatening to become the party that wins the next election. I believe that the old parties in this country are in absolutely desperate trouble. I mean, Labour and the Conservatives. I don't think we are ever going to see another government which is just Labour or just Conservatives in a majority. I don't think it's ever going to happen again. I'm not saying they're never going to be part of a government again after this Parliament. They might even have a Prime Minister, but they are never going to rule on their own again. We are now in a new era of multi-party politics in Britain. That is very exciting. It's also very terrifying when you realise which of those multiple parties is in a position, well, a pole position right now, literally pole position. So that's the context. Populism is on the rise and on the march. That is, I think, a key reason why Zach Polanski, who, as I say, was on the call when we introduced this idea of green populism last summer, has gone for this concept of eco-populism in his bid to be Green leader. And by the time this recording gets shown, as it will do, onto the internet, I think it's very likely that Zach Polanski will be Green Party leader, and one of the reasons why he will be is because the appeal he's made around putting forward the idea of eco-populism has had some degree of resonance. People have been like, yes, we need to have a way of presenting ourselves and projecting ourselves which actually goes into a serious kind of competition with what Farage and the Reform UK Party are offering. Now, one of the things I'm interested in doing with you here this evening is exploring some of the ways in which we should learn from the success of these populist parties, and some of the ways in which we should be careful not to copy them or emulate them in any way whatsoever, if you understand me. Zach has been quite brave in this leadership election campaign by saying that he does want to learn certain lessons from Farage and Reform, that there is something clearly about what they're doing that is working and that is resonating, and that you can't just dismiss that. You can't just write off all their voters. You know, my guess is that there's very few people in this room who are potential Reform voters. But let me tell you, there are quite a lot of potential Reform voters who are also potential Green Party voters. And I know this because I've spoken to some of them. For example, when I was campaigning in the general election campaign last year for Adrian Ramsey in the constituency he won of Waveney Valley, on election day, I got introduced by Adrian, randomly, we just met this guy in the street, to somebody who Adrian had door knocked the day before. And the day before, Adrian had knocked on his door and said, hello, I'm your Green Party candidate in the election tomorrow. You know, who are you thinking of voting for? And the guy said, well, I'm voting Reform. And Adrian, who's very persuasive, talked him around, and he came up to Adrian on election day saying, I've just voted for you, I'm so excited that we might be getting a Green MP here. Why are there potential Reform Green switchers? You might think these are complete opposites, but what they both have in common is that they are anti-establishment parties. Right? What they both have in common is that they recognise that there is something profoundly wrong with the system as it is. What they both have in common is that they are not Labour and that they are not Conservative, and they are in favour of overturning the status quo, just in very different directions. What they both also, incidentally, have in common is they both believe in electoral reform. I mean, that is, if you can believe anything at all that Farage says. If Reform do win the next election, I wouldn't be surprised if they suddenly decide that they don't believe in electoral reform anymore. But right now they're saying they believe in proportional representation, etc., etc. And we'll say a little bit more about democratic reform in a few minutes' time. Anyway, so you get the point. There is something in common for all that they are profoundly opposed in terms of pretty much everything that they believe in and advocate for and their policies. There is something in common between the Green approach and, I would add, the sort of your party approach that is coming with Corbyn and Sultana on the one hand, and the Reform approach on the other. So this is the fundamental context. And what Caroline and Jonathan Porritt and myself and Adrian and Zach Polanski all, I think, recognised last year is if the Green Party is going to build on the foundation it achieved with its remarkable election results last year, it's going to need to do something which is somewhere in this ballpark, in the ballpark of what Zach is calling eco-populism, what Caroline and I are calling climate populism, or with reference to the Green Party, green populism. All right, so let me now try and tell you a bit more about what we envisage green popularism, or more generally climate popularism as being. So, I said already, we need to start much more where people are. So where are people? So I'm going to mention a couple of the key places, as it were, where people are. So one of them is the cost of living crisis. If you don't engage with people's concerns around cost of living, which are at the same time concerns around inequality, because people wouldn't be struggling to pay the bills if we didn't live in such an insanely unequal country, right? If you don't engage with those concerns, well, then you're not going to get anywhere. So when we present questions of environmental justice or climate policy, carbon emissions reductions, when we present those things to people, we have to present them in a way which is relevant to the cost of living crisis. There just isn't any other way around this. If your approach to climate is a fundamentally technocratic approach, if your approach to climate is fundamentally one about numbers, facts and figures, fundamentally one about how do we reduce the parts per million in the atmosphere, you're going to lose. Right? That approach has been tried, it has failed, and there are good reasons, very easy to understand in terms of political communications, for why it has failed. We have to have an approach to these questions which reaches people where they are and what they care about. And one of the things they care about is their pocketbook, right? So if you can successfully pitch to people on the basis of this is actually going to save you money as well as saving the future, well, then you're starting to become relevant. So what are some examples of that, and how might this be communicated? So one little example I'm just going to quickly give you, which I think is quite promising, is the following idea, because everybody also basically hates waste, and it can be expressed in just a very small number of words, which is what we need, right, in order to have successful, easily comprehensible political communications. We should stop heating the sky. Right? We should stop heating the sky, and that's what we're doing when we have central heating or whatever in buildings which are not insulated in their roofs. Do you know that 30% of British buildings have no loft insulation? Not just inadequate loft insulation, that's a higher figure, no loft insulation. How is that even possible? Well, one of the reasons it's possible is because quite a lot of that 30% are people in rental accommodation, and no one really has the incentive, the economic incentive to put the insulation in, right? So what you need is a smart but simple economic policy to roll out at huge scale insulation for roofs which are inadequately insulated or not insulated at all. And then we'll stop heating the sky. And no one really wants to heat the sky. I mean, who wants to heat the sky? That's just stupid, right? It's just waste and it costs money. And you see how all of these things can kind of coincide and synergize, right? And you can say to people at one and the same time, reduce waste, reduce your bills, reduce carbon emissions, make your house more warm and cozy in winter, make your house more cool in the summer, because if you insulate a house properly, that also stops it from overheating, right? Not just from underheating. So those kinds of win-wins we need to be looking for and simple ways to communicate them. So cost of living. And the other thing I would stress as a place where we can start where people are is increasingly people in this country and around the world are concerned about climate as an issue of what is technically termed resilience or adaptation. And these are ideas we need to make much more easily comprehensible to people. What do these terms mean? So resilience is fairly easy to understand. We all have an intuitive idea of it. How do we make ourselves more resilient against the shocks that are coming and that we've started to experience? So super hot summers, 4 heat waves this summer, yeah? Wildfires, you've seen them in Yorkshire recently and a lot in Scotland. These are things which we are not used to. Everybody basically knows, leave out the ridiculous voices of the conspiratorial climate deniers. Everybody basically knows that these things are happening because our climate is changing. You want to convince people of this easily? Just say, talk to a gardener, talk to a farmer, right? They know, we all know that it's happening, and we know that increasingly we are vulnerable to it. Floods. This country is a country where we are, it's a notoriously wet country, unlike the drought we've been having this year, right? We've got these extremes with climate. Flood is an endemic problem in this country. And there are more and more people whose houses are at risk from flooding. Many of them are quite poor, and many of them are increasingly concerned. If we can appeal to people around their increased risk of exposure to flood, and wildfire, and drought, and extreme heat, and potential food shortage, and potential water shortage. These are things which are still on the horizon, but people are seeing them coming. They're seeing them coming in the way that some foods are increasing in price, and that connects us again with cost of living. And they're seeing it coming in the way they've had experiences like, for example, the experience we all had with the onset of COVID of actually our supply chains are quite vulnerable and the systems in this country do not give us much reassurance, do not give us much margin, right, as we move into some kind of times in which we may be increasingly challenged to get the food from abroad which we depend upon, because this country at the moment is chronically incapable of feeding itself, which is a really dumb position to be in as we move into the difficult times that we're moving into. There's all sorts of things that can be done about that. We need to reduce food waste. More of us should eat lower on the food chain. But we also need to have a differently organized food system. And in particular, what we need to do is we need to be aware of and have emergency plans for the scenario in which suddenly we're finding it difficult to feed ourselves. The scenario which almost unfolded at the start of COVID and is becoming more probable with every year as we move deeper into the climate crisis. So I've said 2 things really in the last 5-10 minutes. I've said on the one hand, what we really need is to appeal to people in terms of cost of living and make that make sense to them in relation to green questions, climate questions, questions of how we can simultaneously meet the objectives we need to meet, and questions of resilience, questions of how we adapt to the changing climate. Too often in the past, when we presented the question of climate, we've basically said to people, look, this is a question of us having to reduce the emissions that are in the atmosphere, because if we don't, then really bad things are going to happen. And all of that's true and remains true and is really important. But that's a story which is quite difficult to land with people and quite difficult to get for them to see how it's relevant to them, especially if they're poor, especially if they have relatively low footprint. It's ridiculous to say to a person living on a council estate, how the climate issue is relevant to you is you need to reduce your carbon footprint, as we all do. Their carbon footprint is already very low. They probably they may not have a car of their own. They probably take few or zero foreign holidays. Their footprint relative to a rich person is negligible. It's almost an insult to say to such a person who may be struggling day to day, pay more attention to reducing your carbon emissions. But if you say to such a person, we can help you reduce your bills, and we can help you become less vulnerable to the impacts you're starting to get in your council flat, which is often overheating in the summer now. We can help you to adapt. That's what this is about. This is about us working together as communities and as a nation and so forth to adapt and become more resilient to these impacts that are already here and going to get worse. That is how climate is relevant to most ordinary people, in terms of these questions of what is called adaptation and resilience, which you can help people to make sense of by giving examples like, think about what it's like when your house gets too hot in the summer or too cold in the winter, or when you're prone to flood risk, or whatever it might be. One of the interesting things about adaptation and resilience is it kind of varies area by area, and it's relevant to people in different ways depending on where they live. And that can make it more relevant to local politics. So, the fundamental idea in climate populism and green populism is we can make questions of climate and greenness relevant to people by making them relevant to people, by starting where people are, with cost of living, with questions of resilience and adaptation. And what we seek to do, building on that, is to say, okay, so what if on the basis of that, we were to seek to make a wide, popular appeal to people, and an appeal which was different from the ways that the right populists work, in that it didn't just seek to divide people and polarize them. And this is where our idea of popularism comes in, because the question I have about Zach Polanski's eco-populism is it a bit too much like a kind of mirror image reflection of Farage's right populism? Right? If what we do is say, so you're angry against migrants, we're going to stand up for migrants by opening our doors to them as much as possible and welcoming them. You're angry about the flag or whatever. Well, we're angry about tax injustice and inequality and so forth. Yes, we should be angry about the things which are wrong with our society. But anger alone is not enough. The risk, if you base your appeal entirely in anger, is that you will add to the culture wars and the polarization which is dividing us. And the bet that Caroline and I are making is that actually people are starting to get tired of being endlessly divided, and they want to look instead for what unites them. And they want to look instead for maybe a more civil public discourse and a more civil politics. So central to our idea of popularism, and the reason why we're distinguishing it from populism, is that in order to become genuinely popular, we need to take some of the heat out. We need to depolarize. Yes, there is a place for anger, but there is a place for other emotions as well. There is a place for grief. There is a place for fear. There is a place for curiosity. There is a place for joy. Let's base our appeals, our popular appeals, in all those things, and in the idea that surely there is more that unites us than divides us. And that's part of what we mean by popularism. And that's a pitch that I'm going to be wanting to make, and that Caroline and I are going to be wanting to make in the coming months, quite hard. What we also think is absolutely vital, as I hinted earlier, is that if we're going to make a popular appeal, which promises to be transformational in the way that it hits politics in our country, it has to be genuinely democratic. It can't just be done from on high. Your party are sort of onto this, Corbyn's new outfit, in the way that they're promising to listen to the voices of the people who've signed up to them. But it needs to work on a larger canvas as well. So what Caroline and I are saying is, central to what we mean by anything worth calling green populism or green popularism has to be an idea of genuine democratic reform and renewal. So what does that look like? Well, there are many possibilities here. It starts with things like electoral reform of the House of Lords, etc. But it needs to go much further than that. We need to take citizens' assemblies seriously in the kind of way that other countries have done, for example, Ireland, in the amazing transformations that they went through, when is it, like 10, 15 years ago now, in terms of moving to decriminalize abortion and legalize homosexuality. They achieved those huge changes because they had major processes of what is called deliberative democracy, citizens' assemblies, which led a national debate where citizens, not just politicians, sat together, listened to the evidence and decided which way their country should be moving. We need to have citizens' assemblies on all things climate and eco, on questions of adaptation, on questions of how do we get the cost of living changes, etc., that we need made in a way which works best for everybody. Is that going to be quickly led by government under the government we currently have? Well, of course it's not, right? So in the Climate Majority Project, in the report that Caroline Lucas and I are working on climate populism, we are calling for the setting up of what we are calling a people's plan for climate resilience. A people's plan for climate resilience. A citizens' assembly organized initially from the bottom up, maybe a whole series of them around the country, where people can sit and think and talk together and listen to evidence from experts together about what we need to do to start to defend ourselves together against the threats that are rising from the worsening climate, which the more the right populists get into the ascendancy, the more that worsening is going to happen. Right? And we think, again, this is a way that we can make climate really relevant to people. Right? If people care about the potential flood risk that they are vulnerable to, or heat risk, or a little bit further down the line, risks of water shortages, food shortages, etc. It's relevant to them, it means something to them. If we ask people and offer people ways to get involved together, to think together about how that works, what should be done about it, and in particular, as I said earlier, how that works in their local area. The People's Plan for Climate Resilience, as we see it, should be something which happens nationally, but also all over the place, with local versions all over the place. If we offer people the chance to be involved in that, we think that people may jump at that chance. So, coming towards the end of my remarks, then we're going to have a long time to discuss and have an open Q&A on this, because I think it would be absurd to talk about what I'm talking about here and just sort of give you a lecture and then say, right, that's it, I'm not interested in what you think, I'm very interested in what you think. If we're going to do what we're talking about here, it's going to be done in a way which is genuinely participatory. Yeah? So, what I've sought to say here is, we are in a crisis. We're in a crisis of democratic legitimacy. We're in a political crisis which may lead to the ascendancy of right populists in this country, which would be disastrous. We must think, and we've only got a few years to think about and organize our response to this in such a way that we have a response which can actually work, which can really feel relevant to people. And the pitch that Caroline and I are making is that response, yes, needs to be based in anger, but it needs to be based in other emotions as well. And it needs to be done in a way that brings people together and depolarizes, not just makes everything into more and more of a culture war. If we pitch, for example, people who are challenging trans rights on the one hand against people who say we must absolutely endorse everything that trans rights activists say, and to hell with that, to hell with feminism if it comes into conflict with that. If that's the conflict that we have and we just try to pick sides in it, then we're finished. If the conflict that we have in relation to immigration is one where we say Farage and his cohort are a bunch of horrible racists, which they are, and everything they say, we say the opposite. And they want to close the doors, they want to batten down the hatches, we want to open the doors. If we just say the opposite of what they say, then we're going to lose, right? If you try to convince people in this country to open the doors completely wide and have no immigration controls, you are going to lose. Yeah? What we need to do is look for reasonable middle ground, but reasonable middle ground which can be made sense of to people in a way which appeals to them and actually speaks to their common sense intuitions. That's why it should be based in ideas like, let's stop heating the sky. And it just makes sense to tax the very rich somewhat more so that we can pay for the things that we really need to do. And let's figure out ways together, and I emphasize the figuring out bit, in which we can actually do something about the cost of living crisis while doing something about the climate crisis at the same time. And let's make ourselves safer against the challenges that are coming, and they are coming, and they're escalating. We think if we offer people ways of engaging on that kind of quite comprehensible basis with the things we've been talking about for years in ways that can make more intuitive sense to people, if we offer people ways of engaging with the cost of living crisis and with the rising challenges around climate resilience that speak to their concerns and that are comprehensible, and if we offer people ways of actually being involved with that, and that's where the People's Plan for Climate Resilience comes in, and eventually that should lead to full-on citizens' assembly processes and other processes that are run by national and local government, then we think we've actually got a chance. I don't put it any stronger than that, but a chance is much better than no chance at all. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today. I'm happy to go into any of the technicalities more if people want to explore them in questions, whether that be to do with these ideas of populism and popularism, or to do with the Green Party and other parties, or to do with some of the details of how the policy might work, etc. But what I've tried to do in the last half hour is just lay out the kind of basic pitch and give you a bit of an idea of what we could mean if we say, let's be serious about being popular in our appeal, and in having an appeal which is actually relevant to people and starts where people are, rather than thinking that we have the answers and imposing the answers on people from the top down. I hope that you're excited by the idea that this might be a live conversation, and a conversation that actually, maybe through the People's Plan for Climate Resilience, could start to become a sort of living reality that huge numbers of people could get involved with. But I guess I'm about to find out whether you like the idea. Thank you for listening. Thank you. While you're thinking about your questions, I'm actually going to send around the list that I already brought for people to sign up for the Climate Majority Project or for my emails, but there's also the list up here for the Green Party. So I'm going to send this around with the pen, and if I can get it back at the end of the evening, I'll be very grateful. Okay. Right. Who has a question they would like to start with? Yes?
What do you say about people who I know some people who are so disillusioned that they don't want to vote at all?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about...
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question is, what do we say to the disillusioned and the non-voters, right? So that's relevant to the point I made near the start about how you might think that potential Reform voters and potential Green voters have nothing in common. But actually, quite a lot of them do have something in common. Quite a lot of them are quite disillusioned, right? One of the reasons why the Brexit referendum passed was because a lot of people who hadn't voted before came out to vote Leave. One of the reasons why Farage and his people are doing quite well in the polls right now is because they are motivating some people to vote who hadn't voted before. So if something like green populism or eco-populism or climate populism is going to work, it needs to do the same thing. So let me try to come more directly to your question. I would say that I hope that some of what I've said starts to speak to the question. People who have thought that the Green Party or that issues to do with climate are irrelevant to them, for example, because what's relevant is only stuff to do with big issues of national policy, questions of industrial policy, which are going to influence the number of carbon atoms that we emit, etc., etc. I'm hoping that we can give them a sense that this is something different by saying to them, we are interested in starting where you are. If you are concerned, for example, about the fact that your kids can't swim safely in Lake Windermere, let's talk about why that is, right? And that's fundamentally because the water companies in this country were privatized, and we ought to renationalize them. If you are concerned by the fact that you are at risk of being flooded out, let's talk about why that is. And that might be because, again, of the water companies, or it might be because a lot of our flood management policies in this country are crap or non-existent. We need to make the things that we are interested in, and quite a lot of people in this room are probably, you know, a little bit nerdy about transport policy or about how to build or retrofit homes or about farming and food growing. That's all great, you know, I share some bits of that nerdiness. We need to make the things that we care about relevant to people in ways I tried to describe. We need to make sure that when we are talking about climate, it's not remote and abstract, but is expressed in terms of impacts, actual and potential impacts, and what we can actually do about them. We need to make sure that when we're talking about the way that we should change policy around energy, that it becomes clear to people how that is going to impact their bills and how we can help their bills to go down by having more renewable energy and less nuclear energy and less fossil energy and less energy getting wasted and less heating of the sky. And this is not a complete answer, and there's much, much more that could be said, and others in the room may have further ideas. But I hope that those are some points to start with. What we need to say to people who are disillusioned is, we understand why you're disillusioned. I mean, we're kind of disillusioned too, right? But you can decide on the basis of your disillusion to say they're all as bad as each other, which is not true. Or you can decide on the basis of your disillusion to think, okay, what can I actually do about this, which is relevant to me, and which will help me and people like me and my kids, and, you know, maybe help other things I care about, like nature, for example. You know, lots of poor people and working class people, and sometimes people who don't vote, care about their local park or woodland, or having somewhere decent to swim in at the weekend, or, you know, play football in, etc., etc. So these are the kind of ways in which we make stuff relevant to people. And of course, some of what I'm saying is obvious, and some of what I'm saying has been practiced for years. But what we're trying to get at is, this needs to be put front and center, and wherever we're tempted to resort to abstractions or sort of top-down policy solutions or whatever, we need to kind of check ourselves and think, okay, let's take a moment. How can we make this actually feel relevant to people who are on the front lines of experiencing these kind of things? And that's how you can start to get them voting when maybe they're feeling too disillusioned to bother. Does that feel like an answer to your question?
Yeah, you think you say like education.
Well, yeah, but I wouldn't just use that word. I would say it's about being able to tell a compelling story, right? I mean, human beings understand things and relate to things usually through fairly simple messages and through narratives and stories, right? And that is something which somebody like Farage understands. And that's why I think that it is to Zach Polanski's credit that he's been willing to say, you know, we can't just dismiss every single thing that Farage says or does. We have to be willing to learn, even while having fundamentally different values. We have to tell different, compelling, straightforward stories. And I've tried to sketch a little bit about what some of those stories might be.
Yeah, sorry. What would you say, maybe like you were saying, appealing to their like more immediate concerns?
Yeah.
Instead of like the national issues.
Yeah, you need to start.
Like you were saying, like local park. Like,
Yeah.
You might lose your local park. You might lose your.
Yeah, and I know that some of you here are involved in local politics. Some people in the room have stood or are standing for the Greens in elections, for example. And you're probably already doing some of this. What I'm trying to say is, let's start with people's immediate concerns. Let's not be ashamed about doing that. And then let's try to connect those concerns to deeper things that are going on, more long-term things that are going on. And, you know, most people sense that we are in real trouble, for example, with the climate, also increasingly with AI. What they don't know is what to do about it. What they don't feel is agency in relation to it. The great thing about beginning, for example, with questions of resilience and adaptation is it gives people agency. There is stuff that local councils can do about it. There is also stuff that you can do about it on your street and even in your home. And there are ways in which that can be made easier. And that's the kind of story we need to tell to start to kind of build the kind of critical mass and help all of this to make sense to many more people than it does. Yeah?
You said earlier that you thought people were moving away from wanting to be divided. I just wondered what...
Sorry, could you speak up?
Sorry. You said earlier that you thought people were moving away from this division and wanted to be moving closer together. I just wondered what your evidence was for that.
Yeah, well, so there's various different ways in which you can find evidence for that. So I'm just going to give one kind of tiny anecdotal fact. Sales of Teslas in this country and in Europe have absolutely plummeted over the last year. Why? Because a hell of a lot of people just think, God, the way that this Elon Musk person has turned out is just kind of nasty, and I don't want to have anything to do with that, right? People think that young people are obsessed with social media, and yes, a lot of young people spend a lot of time on social media, more time than is healthy, and it's damaging. So do a lot of older people, by the way. I certainly do. There are young people who are giving up social media or radically restricting it. That is a kind of trend that is happening. There are young people who are sort of self-consciously and deliberately coming off Meta. If you ask people in opinion polls, look at the polls done recently, for example, by More in Common. More in Common, a very good organisation that look into this kind of stuff. More in Common have asked people questions often like, do you feel that that this country is unnecessarily divided, more divided than it used to be, etc. And large numbers of people say yes, and they don't like it. They're not happy about it. This is a punt, this is a pitch, and I've just given you a few pieces of evidence. Opposite pieces of evidence could be adduced. Why has polarization been happening? It's been happening because it does appeal to some of people's instincts. People do sometimes enjoy being angry and complaining and venting for bad reason as well as for good reason. Social media weaponizes this and deliberately kind of creates echo chambers and deliberately riles people up. And makes them angry. But what I'm saying is you've got those trends that are pushing, but then those trends are kind of producing a counter response. And I think, and it's partly a gut feeling as well as being evidential, I think that there is potential there. I think there is a potential there that we can build on to not just meet anger with anger, but as the Quakers would say, and we're in a wonderful old Quaker meeting house here, to meet anger with something different and to say, maybe we can do a little bit better than this. You know, I think that it's going to be increasingly important in times where there is going to be a lot of division and frankly a lot of suffering in the coming 5, 10, 15 years, for people to seek to build community, to build community resilience. I've already been touching on that. And the good news is people are hungry for it. People are hungry for community. They know they're missing it. And most people don't actually want to spend most of their time shouting at each other. I really believe, as the Quakers do, that most people most of the time want something better than that. Yeah.
How do we improve the very shoddy journalism that is everywhere, from the BBC to even good quality newspapers, where they are just following like sheep a kind of fear-mongering narrative, and they're not having the kind of integrity to put up the alternative views.
Yeah.
I mean, even the Home Affairs Select Committee under the Tory government came up with, if you're looking at immigration, you've got to put safe routes in place. Mm-hmm. This just doesn't get any airing or discussion.
Yeah.
So I think we are squashed under a lot of very poor quality soundbite journalism.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So just a word in relation to immigration, which we're going to be touching on in our climate populism report, because you can't really talk about this question in a meaningful way and just ignore that question altogether, because it's been so important in our politics in recent years. And I'll just speak for myself now, because Caroline's view is somewhat different. We're going to sort of have some of that out in the report. My view is that what we need to do is talk common sense in relation to immigration and try to create common ground, and a sort of ground for a kind of historic compromise. It won't look at all like what Farage et al. Put forward, but it won't look like pure open borders either. What it'll look like is safe routes. What it'll look like is for there to be a new protocol to the Geneva Convention on Refugees, which recognizes the category of climate refugee. What it'll look like is honest discourse around the ways that migrants enrich our society, and honest discourse around the ways in which, when you have more and more swelling numbers in an island, it does put pressure on some services, and it does make some people feel, oh my God, things are changing terribly fast here, and I don't know my neighbours anymore, etc., etc. You know, trying to be kind of honest about the different ways in which migration is and isn't an issue, and the kind of ways in which it can be tackled. But as you say, that's a substantive comment about immigration. We could talk about that more. As you say, having the kind of relatively kind of sane debate around that, which we need to have, is difficult in the contemporary media and political environment. What can we do about that? So one simple point I would make is we need to back up and support media which are doing a better job on this. So I'm going to give an example here, which you might say is sort of hackneyed and stuck in the culture wars itself. But I do think it is fair to say that the coverage of the Guardian tends to be better on this kind of issue than coverage in most other media outlets. Looking to a much more kind of local level, one of the things we badly need is a resurgence in local media, because there's been a precipitous decline in local journalism and local newspapers, and that leaves a kind of vacuum that can be filled by conspiracy theories or rubbish paid ads on Meta platforms, etc. How is that going to happen? How is that resurgence of local journalism and media going to happen? Well, the best bet is that people like some of the people in this room are going to make it happen. Right? I mean, that is what's happening in some parts of the country. You've got interesting examples like, for example, the Bristol Cable, which is a new independent local media in the city of Bristol. And there are a number of other examples that I could cite. People need to create their own new local media where there isn't media which is doing the job adequately. Ultimately, what we need, but this is probably beyond the capacity of most or all of us in this room, is for there to be new national or international media, which are actually much more based in truth and actually trying to engineer a civil debate. That's a very, very big ask. But I think it is fair to say that eventually we're going to need something like that. We aren't actually going to get through what is coming without better media than the media we have. But right now, that's a very big ask. So I would say things like start with support media which you actually think are doing a decent job, and be involved in the creation of new media which can do a better job, especially locally. Yes.
If you find yourself face to face with someone who is leaning towards voting reform because of their sense of frustration, how can you, in some way, make them see that you're being truthful rather than someone from a reform, telling them untruths? How can you get across that you're being genuine in the beliefs that you're holding?
Yeah, good. So I'd say two things about that. Firstly, create empathy. Again, we've already been making this point, but let's make it again by saying to such a person, we're frustrated too, right? We're not just kind of politicians of the old school kind of playing the game and saying things are basically okay. We have to actually say it and mean it, that things really are not okay, that this society is in really serious trouble, that the world is in really serious trouble, that lots of things are absolutely not as they are, and that we've got ideas and processes to offer which could actually make a difference to that, starting where you are and with what you're concerned about. I say that's the first and absolutely crucial thing. Now, in terms of how we can convince such a person that what we have to offer on this front makes more sense than the populist stuff they hear on reform, it's complicated and it's not straightforward, but there are ways to do it. So one way you can potentially do it is by pointing out to people, have the ideas and past claims of reform politicians been borne out. So, for example, the claims that were made by the Leave campaign for the Brexit referendum, were they true? And no, some of them are demonstrably not true. They didn't give £350 million a week or whatever it was extra to the NHS, and that was never going to happen. Brexit is quite a good one, because although Brexit is an issue which divides the country and therefore can polarise, the polls now are very clear. The overwhelming majority of people in this country think it was a mistake to come out of the EU. I'm actually no lover of the EU. I wouldn't go back into the EU tomorrow. I think the EU itself is massively in need of reform. I didn't support the Remain campaign until the very end of the referendum, sort of reluctantly, because I was so unimpressed with it and with the EU. But what you can make a wide appeal to people by is by saying, you were sold a pup in relation to the Brexit referendum, and even quite a lot of people who lean right politically in this country now recognise that they were sold a pup. So that's one thing. It's just an example, but it might be a good example. On the more kind of positive side, I think you can say in relation to Greens, and also I think Jeremy Corbyn, to his credit, can say the same thing, that Greens and someone like Corbyn have been chipping away, saying basically the same thing, trying to do the right thing for a long time, and have proved themselves to be reliable in terms of making claims about where the world is headed and how much trouble that we are in. You know, the claims that were made in relation to the climate crisis are coming true, tragically. In fact, some of what's happening in relation to the climate is happening more rapidly than the scientists predicted. You know, the situation is actually worse than worst case scenarios in respect of some of what's been happening vis-a-vis the climate and other environmental questions. So that's another kind of way in to say, look, we said it, it turned out to be true. We're actually trustworthy and reasonable on this. But at the end of the day, you've actually got to kind of show it and kind of mean it and kind of resonate with people in ways that they can understand. So we come back to where we were before, right? It's about kind of being yourself and telling the truth, but it's also about making sure that you do that in a way which is actually accessible to people, right? So if you kind of go off into abstract policy talk or science talk, most people, most of the time, won't be able to follow that and won't be able to relate it. So it needs to be coming through you in a truthful way, but it also needs to be accessible and comprehensible. Yes?
How is the Green Party going to be ready in 3 years to run a full national campaign?
Okay, so the short answer to that question is it's not. But luckily it doesn't need to be, right? So at this past election, the Green Party ran a national campaign, but it only really tried to win 4 seats. At the next election, what the Green Party needs to do is run an even more serious national campaign and make a much wider appeal, but not try to win 650 seats or even 350 seats. How many seats should the Green Party try to win at the next election? We don't really know yet, and there's internal debate about that. I think it'll be somewhere between 16 and 60. And you might say that's frustratingly slow, right? Even if the Green Party were to win 60 seats at the next election, that's only 1/10 of the seats in Parliament. It's not enough. It's certainly not enough to run the government. but you can't run before you can walk, right? We went from 1 to 4 at the last election. I think if we go from 4 to 16 or 25 or 40 or 60, any of those will be a great achievement and will make a real difference. What is the real game at the next election? I think the real game at the next election is A, to ensure that the man who rhymes with garage doesn't become Prime Minister, and B, to have a much larger number of Greens elected, and C, to potentially be part of something like a coalition government with other parties. What might those parties be? Well, obviously it might be the Labour Party, it might well be the Labour Party, it might well be the Lib Dems, who've got 72 seats at the moment, which is a lot, and they're probably going to have even more next time. It might well be your party. We've got no idea how many seats they're going to have. They could have anywhere from 0 to, I don't know, 50, maybe even more than that. I don't think it's likely to be more than that. So you could have, let's, we're just plucking numbers out of the air here, but the next parliament, the seats for the different parties might be something like 250 Labour, 250 Reform, 80 Lib Dem, 40 Green, 20 your party, 50 Conservative. I think there could be an astonishing cull of Conservatives at the next election, even down from their already low numbers. If it's something like that, then who gets to form a government? Well, your guess is as good as mine. But the next government could be a government which was some kind of coalition which had Green Party ministers. So there could be Green Party ministers in the government for the first time ever in this country after the next election. And the more Green MPs there are, the more likely that is to happen. And the more I would claim that we move in roughly a Green popularist direction, the more likely we are to get a decent number of MPs. As you'll have heard, I don't think that's exactly the same thing as what Zach Polanski is talking about, but it's in the ballpark. The conversation is happening, and it has been happening for a while, and we're part of taking that conversation here forward this evening. Yeah?
I just wonder how you envisage working with a party like your party, given that there is some common ground,
Yeah.
given that it seems to me it was quite likely that your 4 MPs were partly gained through the failure of the Corbyn kind of project.
Yeah.
Back in the views.
Yeah.
And the fact that people put it in mind. Certainly, I think if you're looking for a voice that kind of reflects your values, and you have supported Corbyn in the past,
Yeah.
you now look to the Greens, and I certainly looked to the Greens prior to his new party. So it seems to me you might be aiming at the same territory as
Yeah.
when it comes to.
I think there's the truth in that. If anyone didn't hear the question is basically how should the Green Party relate to your party, the new Corbyn venture. So look, here's what I think. It's difficult, it's early days, and these things are always difficult in politics, and they're difficult under a first-past-the-post system, but that's exactly why you have to think about them, right, and take them seriously. So a few remarks. Firstly, I agree with you that it's obvious that there is a lot in common between your party and the Green Party. Secondly, your party under presumably Corbyn and Sultana, and the Green Party under presumably Polanski, I think it will be possible for them to talk to each other. Thirdly, I think it would be pretty ridiculous for Green Party MPs to have your party candidates stand against them. And it would be pretty ridiculous for your party MPs, for example, Corbyn himself, to have Green Party candidates standing against them. I just think that would be just a foolish kind of waste of resources. And then I would say one ought to go beyond that. Now, how much more it's going to be possible to go beyond that, I don't really know, and it's not going to be easy. But I think at minimum, really going beyond that, what you should have is some kind of informal arrangement of kind of like, well, we're going to try hard over here, you try hard over there. It would be kind of dumb to have seats where there's, say, a rubbish Labour minister like Wes Streeting, and where you had both a Green Party candidate and a Your Party candidate both trying to defeat him. Let the one who's best placed to defeat him, which in this case is probably your party, have a go at taking him out. you know, all of this is in a certain sense premature and quite kind of speculative. But what I'm trying to get at is, I think I'm very much in sympathy with your question, that we need to be serious about thinking how we can approach your party in a way which isn't just confrontational and isn't just the old politics. And of course that fits with the essential logic in what I said, which is to say, let's think about this in ways that are pragmatic, and let's think about this in ways which are depolarizing. Right? If we're going to mean it when we say we want to take some of the unnecessary polarity and anger out of British politics, then we must be ready to work with people from other parties where appropriate. We must. There's no other way in which you can be serious. You can't go around saying kind of, we want to have a politics which is less angry, more civil, more pluralistic, more depolarizing, not just buying into culture wars, and we're not interested in working with anyone else. You know, it just doesn't add up, right? The final thing I want to say, and this comes back also to the previous question, and comes back to how I started my talk, we are in unprecedented and frankly deeply dangerous times. I mean, we're in deeply dangerous times, we're in terrible trouble in relation to climate, we're in escalating trouble in relation to AI, we're in bad trouble on a geopolitical basis, and we're in trouble in terms of our political and democratic system in this country, like a number of other countries. When you're staring down the barrel of Prime Minister Farage, you need to be ready to do stuff you haven't necessarily done before, right? In the 1930s, there were popular fronts formed in a number of European countries, including famously, successfully in France. And it happened again recently in France, to stop the Front National from winning the legislative elections last year, right? There was a rapid set of electoral arrangements made among the left and Greens to try to stop the Front National from winning outright those elections, and it succeeded. When you're staring down the barrel of a potential Prime Minister Farage, you have to be willing to do things politically and to take certain kinds of risks that you haven't even necessarily entertained before. History will not forgive us if what happens at the next election is that Farage wins because Greens and your party and Labour and Lib Dems are everywhere just standing against each other and everyone ends up with like 15% and the Reform candidate wins with 22%. I mean, we could have absolutely ridiculous results happening at the next general election. You're starting to see some of these results in council elections. People winning elections with like 25% of the vote. I mean, if the actual people who voted, never mind the non-voters, of the actual people who voted, you're getting people winning with 25% now because they've got 25%, they've got 23, they've got 17, they've got 14, they've got 10, right? The way around that is you think intelligently about who's going to target where, who's going to stand where, who's going to campaign where, who's going to put their resources where. We have to ask those kinds of questions if we are serious about stopping right populists from coming to power. Yes?
Yeah, I just wondered if you could say a bit more about how you see citizens' assemblies rolling out. We've just had a climate assembly in Cumbria and it challenged some of the things you were saying, that some of the recommendations that came out were so commonsensical, coming out of just Joe Soap on the streets.
Right.
Which was hugely encouraging. So I just wondered if you could say a bit about, you know, your vision of citizens.
I'd be happy to, but can you tell me a bit more about the Cumbrian one first, because I'm really interested. So was this an official council assembly or a citizens' popular one?
Some colleagues about that. Well, no, it was run by Future Proof Cumbria, was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And I think it was about, I don't know, somebody else in the room might know better than me.
And what was the topic? What was it trying to decide?
What was the question was about how might ordinary people get more involved in climate
Okay,
change
great.
in Cumbria?
Yeah.
How might your voice be heard better? Yeah.
Well, it sounds like I should find out more about it because it sounds really good, and it sounds a bit like what I'm talking about and what we're talking about. There are a number of these initiatives now that have been happening around the country with various different local authorities or done by various kinds of citizens groups. Basically, what we're saying is there need to be more of them. They need to be scaled up. they need to be better resourced, they need to be given a better profile. Ultimately, what we need, we think, is something like a People's Plan for Climate Resilience, where this is a sort of a process which is occurring over a decent period of time, quite well resourced, not just sort of piecemeal, but sort of under one umbrella, and which is basically kind of pressuring national government and saying, because you're not doing this, we're doing it, and make national government feel bad for not doing it and look bad. And hopefully it influences what different parties offer in relation to the next election. But let me say something else as well, which is not just about elections and politics, because I've said a few things, and some people in the room know that this is what a lot of my work is about the trouble that we're in. And you can read my books or articles or my stuff online or other stuff by other people in the Climate Majority Project to find out more about this. We are in really serious trouble. We are in so much trouble that there is no guarantee that the system as we know it persists in this country for another 15 years, 10 years, 5 years even. I had the good fortune to see an internal government report last year. I say good fortune, it was a pretty awful experience. A report that was shown to me by a civil servant. I literally got the chance to look at this report for 15 minutes. They shouldn't have shown it to me. And I was very grateful that they did. Because what this report said, it was a report that was commissioned within DEFRA, and it hasn't been made public, and I've tried to get it to be made public, and so far I've failed. But I can tell you what I saw, and what I saw is this report was about the stability and viability of our critical systems in this country. And critical systems basically means things like electricity, food, water, wastewater. Wastewater is a crucial one. It's not the same as water. We've come to see how crucial it is a bit over the last year in this country. The vulnerability of these critical systems. And basically what this report said, this is an internal government report, right? This isn't done by Extinction Rebellion or even by a bunch of independent scientists, by the government themselves. Basically what the report said is nearly all of these critical systems are at risk of collapse on a business as usual pathway from about 2030. And each year after that, unless our course is changed, that risk of collapse goes up and up and up. And when I read this report, I was shocked but not surprised, if you understand me. I was not surprised because this is exactly the kind of thing that a number of us have been arguing for some years is the case. But I was shocked to see it confirmed from within government. That there are people within government who know how much trouble we're in. If we start to experience collapse events, we are really going to need local resilience. We are really going to need strong communities. We are really going to need whatever we can have by way of local governance and local government in the absence of sufficient national government or governance, right? This is one reason why local democracy and the kinds of thing I think that you're talking about that's happened here in Cumbria matter. Because we may not be able to rely for the rest of our lives, and this applies more, of course, for those of us who are young, or those of you who are young. We may not be able to rely on government to sort things and source things in the way we have grown used to relying on that. And that is a way in which, I hope this is comprehensible to people. This stuff is not an academic exercise anymore. This is not a drill. It really, really matters. And we need to start to be able to bring that home to people. And we need to start to be able to actually build people's experience in and willingness to decide things and run things for themselves, because we may not be able to outsource it to others to do it for us any longer, or much longer. Yes?
I was just wondering if there's an opportunity for local councils to do a public event where each party is on the stage from here to here, and there's a skilled, very good facilitator there, and getting them to express their views, but also to ask questions of each other, to try to, on the one hand, to understand, well, I'm Conservative, and you're a flipping Green, and try to understand where they're coming from and what their ideas are. Secondly, for the public, to understand where perhaps a particular party is fragile or weak.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know. I would love to believe that what you say is possible and could work, but I'm afraid colour me a bit sceptical. I think that kind of thing has kind of been tried, and it's very difficult to make it work in our contemporary political culture. Let me offer a couple of alternatives. One thing is, I think that something which would be really valuable would be to have what you describe happening behind closed doors sometimes, right? In other words, when you get politicians in front of an audience in the way you're describing, they will play typically to what they think that audience wants to hear. If you get them in what's technically called a Chatham House setting, a setting where what they say is not on the record, then you might be able to build confidence between them and among them. And that's sort of ultimately the kind of thing that we'd like to do with our climate populism idea. You know, we'd like to get people in Labour and the Lib Dems and your party and the Greens and the Conservatives, because there's an interesting struggle for the soul of the Conservative Party that is kind of happening under the radar. It is going to carry on happening for the next few years. Are they going to try to copy reform or chase after reform? If they do, which is what they're doing at the moment, I think they're going to totally fail, because you can't out-reform reform. They're just going to look like pale shadows of Farage. Are they going to do that? Or are they going to try to reclaim some of the mantle of traditional conservatism, which is actually about conserving things, for example, and actually about how do we hold on to our heritage, and not just kind of tearing everything up in pursuit of profit, and not just kind of coming up with horrible polarizing sound bites like people in reform do. So that's all by way of saying that I think that the kind of stuff we've been talking about here this evening, it's obviously relevant to Greens, but it ought to be relevant to most people in British politics. But I think that it's going to be difficult to have some of those conversations in the public, full public glare of attention. But of course, what I've also been saying here this evening is, but we actually have to have ways of reviving democracy and deepening democracy, etc. So I think that really the stuff we've been saying about citizens' assemblies is actually a more interesting way of doing the kind of thing you're talking about in public, right? So what I would like to see is things like this Cumbrian Assembly and things like the People's Plan for Climate Resilience that we're imagining happening with as much publicity as possible. That is what happened in Ireland when those deliberative democracies, democratic processes happened, and then they led to those referenda and so on. There was a genuine national debate, but it wasn't dominated by politicians. Politicians were involved, but citizens, ordinary people, were front and centre. And that is, I think, what is actually potentially revolutionary. Right, we are almost at the end. Final question.
Thanks, Rupert. Thank you so much. It's such a relief to hear somebody talking about the likelihood of collapse and the need for tackling polarisation and meeting people where they are. I mean, my question takes us back into the abstract. If we stand back and ask, why is the most intelligent species on the planet, allegedly, knowingly undermining its own life support system, it's hard not to come up with headlines like, we have a ridiculous extractivist growth-based economic system that's built on the myth that we can grow our economy forever and find that planet. We have a ridiculous myth that everybody on Earth could have what we mean currently by high quality of life, which is highly consumption and materialistic base. And we have an appallingly human-centric outlook on the world, where we think that other living beings are just resources for us. So while 100% we need to meet people where they are, how do we also tackle these really difficult, deep myths that underpin the worst dysfunction of our society? Like growth economics can go on forever, like other beings don't matter at all. How do we also stand up for the truth that we must move beyond growth economics and we must stand up for other living beings? Which is so far away from meeting people where
Well,
paradox there.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a great question. It's a great question to end with. So there's so much one could say. I'll just try and say a couple of things. First thing I'll say is, I go back to what I said earlier when I said we need to start where people are, but we don't end where people are, right? So you start where people are and you find a way in, and you relevantize to and empathize with their concerns, and then you start to hopefully bring them on a journey with you, or show them how their concerns relate to bigger questions or deeper questions, and you show them the way that what they think it should be a kind of sensible response to their concerns is stymied because of these deeper things, right? And that's how you start to broaden and deepen the conversation, it seems to me, and take it where it really needs to be. And the other thing I want to say is that some of these debates, I think it's an illusion to think something like, well, we should be able to go in and settle the debate and convince people, and on the basis of that really take them with us. So let's take growth for a moment, for example. So I completely agree with you that growthist economics is absurd and insane. And I've written a lot about this over the years. But what I also think is, if we think something like, well, it's more and more clear that it is, and the evidence is more and more clear, so we should be able to win that debate. And when we win that debate, then we can, then it will be clear to people what they need to do. I think that's misleading. I don't think we are going to win the debate, or at least I don't think we're going to win the debate for a long, long time to come. Why? Partly simply because the institutional inertial forces ranged against us are so great. Growthism is still hegemonic in the national media. It's still hegemonic in economics departments. It has enormous weight of money and institutions and so on behind it. So much as I would love to be able to say, well, it's obvious now that growthism is absurd and insane and dangerous and killing us all, and we should move to a sort of post-growth economy or a donut economy or whatever. Much as I would like to be able to say that, what I actually am inclined to say instead is something like, the case for post-growth or degrowth is becoming stronger and stronger, but there's something even stronger than that. And what's even stronger than that? Well, here I come back to where you started, where you said it's refreshing to have someone recognize that we're in real danger here of sleepwalking into collapse, with it hardly really being even mentioned much in the national media before it starts to happen. And here's an interesting fact, here's an interesting finding from opinion polls. When you ask people, do you think that collapse will occur during your lifetime or this century or whatever, huge percentages of people say yes, that's what they think is going to happen. So there's a taboo against it, but actually loads and loads of people, and not just the people in this room, are collapse aware and think it's a real risk. So here's what I think we should do in relation to the growth question. I think we should say, yeah, the case for degrowth or post-growth is stronger and stronger. Growthism is insane. But we don't expect to convince everybody of that, and we don't expect to win that debate right now. Given that we don't expect to win that debate right now, what should we do? Well, is there something more fundamental than that which we can, most of us, agree on? And we think in the Climate Majority Project that there is. And what is that? It's that we're increasingly at risk of collapse. And that therefore we need some plan B. And what does the plan B look like? Well, here we come back to some of the main themes of my talk. It looks like climate resilience. It looks like adaptation. It looks like preparedness for worst case scenarios. It looks like starting where people are with many of their day-to-day concerns and connecting those concerns with futures that are increasingly recognized as possible. And that does a bit of a end run around the people who say, but you haven't actually proved that endless growth is impossible. Does a bit of an end run around them, because it says, actually, the sensible, prudent, pragmatic thing to do at this point is to not keep on pushing and pushing, and instead to start to prepare to have a softer landing rather than a hard landing. So yeah, that's my more, I hope, interesting response to your question. We definitely need to take people into the place where it becomes possible to broach the really important things you've said. But we should also look for ways of being able to get broader agreement without actually having to settle those deep paradigmatic questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for staying to the end. I think one person has left before the end. That's pretty impressive out of an audience of 60, 70 odd. If you want to hang around afterwards, I'll be hanging around afterwards. There's tea and coffee, isn't there, out the back, and my book's out the back, and I'll be signing those and stuff. Before you all rush off and start talking among yourselves, can I just make one final tiny plug, which is to the Green Party members in the room. I'm just going to note to you very quickly that there is another election that is coming up soon within the party, which is for our candidates for the House of Lords, if we ever get asked to give more Lords under our absurd patronage system in this country. And I just note that your humble speaker is going to be among those putting himself forward in that election. So if you are a Green Party member and you've enjoyed what you heard this evening, do consider giving me your number one in that vote when it comes around. That's an election that really does matter. Thank you so much, everybody, this evening.